black thing go from left to right, and I thought, I'm going to die out here. No one's ever going to know. I couldn't believe what my eyeballs were showing me. I'll never forget how evil the eyes were. It was horrible. I mean, I've never seen nothing that evil.
It ran towards me at a rate that I can't even explain. Turned and stared at me, and this look of, I just want to kill you. I want to say it was human, but it wasn't.
He was yelling at me to grab a gun. I was like, for what? He said, just grab a gun. And there's footprints all the way to the door of my house. It had went inside my garage, all the way to the door.
911, what are you reporting?
Jesus Christ, you better...
Sir?
Zia!
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's going on now, sir?
That son of a bitch is about 6'9", I don't know.
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh.
You're listening to Sasquatch Chronicles. Check us out online at sasquatchchronicles.com. If you've had an encounter, email me. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. Welcome to the show, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. Got a great show planned for you tonight. Going to be talking to Stan Gordon, who's an author, investigator. He's been looking into UFO sightings since 1959. Really started looking into Bigfoot encounters too as well. And he started finding some weird correlations between the UFO sightings he was investigating, and then there would be a Bigfoot encounter nearby. But he's looked into a lot of different cryptids. And what I like about Stan is he'll take the time to actually go talk to a witness, no matter how weird the story is. He will take the time to go out and investigate it. And I respect that about him. Not a lot of these guys will do that. You know, you start talking about weird stuff and they're out. So if you get a chance, check out his website, stangordon.info. He's got a blog on there. You can buy his books. And some of the reports you'll hear tonight are from his book, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO-Bigfoot Casebook. And you can pick that up at stangordon.info. And a lot of the cases we'll discuss tonight are from that book. He also has Astonishing Encounters, Pennsylvania Unknown Creatures, Casebook 3. If you get a chance, go to his website, stangordon.info. Thank you again to Stan for coming on. And as always, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, please visit sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member, get additional shows. There's also a shop on there, so if you're looking for some ideas for Christmas, a lot of great merchandise at sasquatchchronicles.com. Thank you again for being here. Let's jump into it tonight. I want to welcome Stan Gordon to the show. And Stan, I was just looking at your website. Not only can you get your books on there, but there's a movie, Kecksburg, The Untold Story, or a documentary. And everyone's aware of that famous UFO case.
Yeah, that's the documentary I won a film award for many years ago, and it's still has a lot of interest in the documentary. But yeah, I've been doing this, since 1959. I've been investigating these cases, and I've been out in the field since 1965. And it's amazing what's going on out there. And the last few weeks and months here in Pennsylvania, it's just been amazing. Some of the very unusual encounters we're getting reported.
Yeah, and if you would, for the audience, I know your background, but not everyone does. You started this in 59, and then I think in the late 60s you started a hotline, which was a novel idea back then, because who do you call when you see something weird? And I think even up until this day, a lot of people call the cops, and most of the time they don't help. But that's really where it started for you, isn't it? Taking these calls and going out and investigating these reports?
Yeah, I started in the field investigation 1965 after the Kecksburg UFO incident. And in 1969, I decided to set up a hotline for the public to report basically UFO sightings. But as word got out, the phone in my home was just ringing off the hook day and night, and people were calling in about everything from UFOs and haunted houses and Bigfoot sightings and all kind of phenomena. And in 1970, I decided I was going to try to set up some type of research group, a volunteer research group, because this is more than I could do on my own. So in 1970, I founded the first of 3 volunteer research groups. That was the first one was the Westmoreland County UFO Study Group. It started here in Greensburg, PA, where I live, about 30 miles from Pittsburgh, PA. And it started out small, but by 1973, we had extended to cover the whole state of Pennsylvania. And the group was kind of unique in that most people involved were specialists. We had scientists and engineers and research people, and oh, heck, I had former military intelligence people, I had police officers. I mean, it was amazing the people I got involved. We all did this around our full-time jobs, but I had it set up that we could respond to cases 24 hours a day. And, we were actually building a lot of our own research equipment because you couldn't buy a lot of equipment back in those days, like night vision. And we were very, very active. And to our surprise, we were beginning to get referrals from the news media, from the state police and different agencies out there. And it was very lucky that we were already established, because 1973 rolls around, and first we have a massive UFO wave that goes on all year with hundreds and hundreds of UFO reports. But then the summer of 73, we had the biggest Bigfoot outbreak that was ever recorded. It went on for weeks and months into early 1974. And it was just an amazing time to live through. Back in those days, there was a lot of news media coverage of it. They were covering it very heavily, and both the local and the national news media were covering some of our investigations, all the sightings going on in Pennsylvania. But that is when we began to uncover some very intriguing aspects of Bigfoot that none of us ever even imagined.
I'm curious. I really want to get into that. Can I ask you a quick question before we go on? Because I really want to get into this, and I know this is mainly why you're here tonight. Have you ever taken any abduction cases?
Actually, yes. How, you mean with you, a UFO, allegedly UFO abduction case?
Yeah.
I was probably one of the first in the country to get very involved in them. In the late 60s, we worked on many, many alleged abduction cases from the 60s and the 70s, probably in the 80s. In more recent years, we rarely hear about them anymore, but we did look and do numerous reports. The thing was, we were getting reports in all the time. We were having mountains of reports coming in all the time, all year round, and I still get reports coming in constantly. But we were doing this again, all out of pocket. We all had full-time jobs and families, and we could only do so much. But yeah, we worked on a lot of alleged abduction cases. And, I can't say that, yes, people were taken aboard a spacecraft from another world and they were being abducted by aliens. Can't say that. But we can say that some very credible people had some very strange experiences, and they believed that there was something going on. Many of these people's lives were disrupted by what was happening. And over the years, I mean, there's still, I can think of one person in particular. I've been in touch with this person for over 45 years, who had a missing time incident as a child. There was a huge search for this person, and they searched for hours and hours. They found this child right in an area where they had been searching. And that person, from the time it happened, has had multitudes of phenomena occur throughout her life. But it wasn't just her. Then it was her children, then her grandchildren. And then there's other cases like that we looked into as well. So it's something very interesting. No, but I can't say for sure, again, what was going on. None of us really know, but there was something happening there that affected a lot of people's lives and was very strange.
Yeah, it is strange, and it's strange to hear, and I get these reports too, and I'm not really sure what to make of it. I used to go, well, when people see UFOs and, let's say, Bigfoot, for example, I would say, well, maybe it's two different phenomena that's going on. I don't know. But I've gotten more and more of those, and I'm really not sure what to make of it. Did your opinion of what Bigfoot was back then change to, let's say, today? And what made it change? Yeah,
there's no doubt. And we could talk for hours about this, and I'll just give you a summary, and it'll take a little bit of time to do it. So this major wave of Bigfoot sightings occurs in 1973 here in Pennsylvania, in western PA, and then it began to extend for a much further distance in other parts of the state as well. Many of these Bigfoot sightings were in daylight as well as at night. Many of them were extremely close range. So they were very detailed observations, not like you see on these TV shows. I mean, in some cases, these things are walking out in front of vehicles and your mobile homes 5, 10, 15 feet away from people. and they were getting a detailed descriptions. Sometimes it was more than one creature observed at the same time. My teams would respond to the incidents. We'd be on the scene sometimes within minutes to hours after they happened, or the police, or both in some cases. And in many cases back in those days, there was physical evidence at the scene. So we would have footprints or other evidence there. We were making castings or tracks. And from what I knew about Bigfoot, I was investigating Bigfoot in Pennsylvania in the late 1960s. And there was a history of sightings going back in Pennsylvania from the Native Americans. There's newspaper accounts from the 1800s. So whatever the phenomenon is, it's been going on for a long time. I had always felt when I got involved that we are very likely to deal with an unknown primate, some type of unknown animal. Science had never been able to properly identify at that point. But as these cases are unfolding in 73 and the 74, and many since then, many very strange things began to show up that we were not looking for. And I'll just give you a few ideas. A couple of things that happened. In fact, I have a whole lecture I do just on this topic called Strange Aspects of the Elusive Bigfoot. But anyhow, one of the things was we would get to some of these locations. There would be trails of footprints. And then they would suddenly stop and disappear under different ground conditions where there should have been more tracks, even in fresh snow. It didn't make any sense. There was no indication it could have been fabricated. That was very strange. Then we began to see a pattern. We would have a UFO sighting in a certain area. Within minutes to hours to days later, we would have a Bigfoot sighting or vice versa. And then we had some of the most amazing, very well-documented cases of Bigfoot and UFOs seen together at the same time and place. And I go into great detail on this in my Silent Invasion book. And they're available, by the way, on Amazon, too, not just on my website. But anyhow, a couple of things that turned up. One case that came in pretty early was up in north of Pittsburgh, where two women were waiting for a friend to pick them up out in the country. They see the 7 to 8 foot tall, hairy Bigfoot, white hair. Again, you don't hear about the white ones that often, but we do get those kind of reports. It's running across the road towards the woods, but in one of his hands, it has a glowing ball of light. And a short time later, this object comes across the sky and projects a beam of light down into the woods where the creature ran into. It began to get better and better. One of the most famous cases, and we could just talk for hours about this case, just a brief part of the case, October 25th, 1973, up in Fayette County outside of Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Fayette County, we'll probably talk about that a bit this evening. Fayette County, a lot of these areas is along the Chestnut Ridge. The Chestnut Ridge continues to be one of the most active areas in the country year after year, even this year, with all kind of phenomena. So the Chestnut Ridge runs about 100 miles long from Westmoreland, Fenton, Indiana County in southwest Pennsylvania down into near Preston County, West Virginia. We continue to get UFO sightings, cryptid encounters, Bigfoot encounters, all kind of other phenomena along the ridge. And so October 25th, 73, I get a call from a state trooper from the Uniontown barracks who just came back from investigating this multiple witness incident. And he called and said, you got to get a team up here as soon as you can. There's a good chance of something stolen in the pasture. So what I found out was that about 15 people in that community that evening, they see this huge spherical object about as big as a barn, a bright red sphere, about 100 feet off the ground, slowly moving downward. The number of people in the area were watching this thing coming down, and the fellow who owned the farm, his son was coming out to visit him that night. His son's riding down the farm road. He sees it. He sees people watching this thing. He goes up to a home up on the hill to get a better view, and it looks like it's going to land on his dad's property. So there were two young boys up there. He and the two boys decide they're going to go see what this thing is. He stops at his dad's farm, grabs a .30-06 and a handful of ammunition. As they're riding down the farm road, the dogs are going crazy. They hear this high-pitched whining sound, and they hear these baby crying sounds. And they're getting louder and louder as they get closer to the pasture. They finally walk up the hill towards the pasture, and they're standing there just amazed because about 250 feet away, this object is now on the ground or right above it. This thing now is a big white dome, like a half a sphere, about 100 feet or more in diameter, illuminating the area, making this high-pitched whining noise. And then their attention is drawn to this barbed wire fence about 75 feet away. Here's these two creatures, one behind the other, walking slowly in their direction along the fence. The one in front's 8 feet tall, somewhere around there. The other behind's about 7 feet tall. Pretty much a typical Bigfoot, bipedal, covered with long, dark, matted hair. The arms are so long, almost down to the ground. No neck. They're making these loud baby whining, crying noises, and they have luminous green eyes. And the one kid is so scared he runs out of the field. And the other kid starts yelling, shoot him, shoot him. Well, anyhow, the fellow didn't realize when he grabbed any ammunition, he had two tracers in it. So the hunters out there know you just get that luminous trail when you fire those tracers. First shot was a tracer, no effect. He fires a second tracer. When he does, the largest of those two creatures reached out as though to grab that tracer, makes this loud whining, crying sound, and the object in the field vanishes. It doesn't take off, it just disappears. So almost all the luminosity is gone, the sound stops, it gets darker, and the creatures turn around, start walking back towards the woods along the barbed wire fence. The guy at that point shooting live ammo with his .30-06 at the creatures. He's mainly aiming at that largest creature. And he said to me for years and years, he said, I'll never forget how that creature with his glowing green eyes is staring at me as I'm pumping live ammo into it with no effect on it whatsoever. Anyhow, again, the short part of the story is they called the state police. When the trooper arrived, trooper goes up with the witness looking for evidence, and the trooper told me the area where the object was on the ground was self-luminescent and glowing, about 100 feet or more in diameter. The farm animals wouldn't go into the area. He said if he had a newspaper, he could have sound out within that glowing area. He could have read the newspaper from the glow coming off that luminous area. And then they both went back to the barracks, and a lot of very weird things happened throughout the evening when my team got there. And just too long to get into. But that was the case, among others, but that one primarily that indicated to my team and myself there was a lot more to the Bigfoot phenomena than any of us could ever imagine. And then the reports got even stranger and stranger, if you want to get into that.
Yeah, I'd like to get into it. I'm curious, can you give you don't have to go into it if you don't want to, but can you give us a brief summary of the weird things that happened to you and your team?
Well, as all these reports are going on, and again, they're coming in from widespread areas. You've got to remember, 1973, there's no internet, there's no cell phones, there's all a different time period. People generally would call the police if they were frightened about something, so they would get the calls, or we would get the calls, and they would refer the calls over. So these cases were not hearsay. They weren't something that was just happening and, months, years later, somebody look into it. No, we were on the scene within minutes to hours, so we're documenting all this as it's happening. And again, the police were involved in some of these incidents, and the more we began to look into these reports, more we began to see some very strange things that made no sense if we're dealing with an unknown type animal. And then it was the case that happened up in Fayette County, again, deep in the mountains up near Ohiopyle, February 6, 1974. It was the case that, as reluctant I am to say it, and it's not the only case, and I am aware of many of them throughout the country and around the world, that other researchers have looked into, which suggests the possibility that we may be dealing with something other than a normal flesh and blood animal, which is why there's no bodies. For lack of a better term, we may well be dealing with something that's from another reality or another dimension. And this particular case was the one among others that really pretty much showed that data to us. And this was, again, up near Ohiopyle. Some of the listeners will remember the time period because we had a national trucker strike at the time. There was violence across the country. There was gas rationing. And because of the violence in Pennsylvania, the National Guard and the state police were patrolling together. So when the call came into the state police barracks, both the National Guardsmen and the state police responded to the incident. I couldn't get up the next morning because there's no gas available in my area, but I was up there early the next morning with my team. And what happened was this woman who lived in the mountains all her life, lived deep in the mountains in a cabin home. She knew animals very well, pretty much not afraid of anything, was a very good shot. She's sitting there watching TV that night as normal, and she begins to hear this little ruckus on her front porch of her little cabin home. She had some pop cans out there, and someone was knocking the pop cans around. Well, a few weeks before, there was a pack of wild dogs coming through, so she figured, well, that's probably those dogs again. So she grabbed her shotgun, and she thought, you know what, I'll just shoot it over their head and scare those dogs away. So she grabs her shotgun, loads the chamber, walks over to the wall, turns on the switch for the outside porch light, steps out on the porch, and a few feet in front of her, there's no dogs, but here's this huge, hairy Bigfoot creature standing there with his arms straight up over its head. And what does she do? She fires right into it with her shotgun. She said there's this bright burst of light, like a flash on a camera, and the creature physically disappears right in front of her. Now, her in-laws lived very close by, about 100 feet away. They heard the gunshot. They called her, asked what she was shooting at. She explained to them. Her son-in-law grabs his pistol, starts walking up that dark road. He sees a figure running up the road, and then he said as he got closer, he's surrounded by 4 or 5 hairy people with eyes like coals of fire, starts shooting at him randomly, runs into the cabin, and about the same time, there's this large object hovering over the woods, kind of gave the impression like a big Christmas ornament hovering over there at the same time. And the woman, you know, the many times I interviewed her, she never used the word Bigfoot. She said it looked like a great big hairy ape. That was the case among others that, again, suggested that we're dealing with something other than a flesh and blood animal. And these reports, you know, what I have to stress is most UFO sightings have nothing to do with Bigfoot. Most Bigfoot sightings have nothing to do with UFOs. However, the cases are ongoing. I'm aware of this from all over the country and around the world since the 1970s. I've talked to many other researchers out there. Many of them are aware of the cases, and more and more you're hearing about this now in recent years. But back 30, 40 years ago, it was kept quiet because the researchers didn't want to be laughed at by their colleagues, and even the witnesses were extremely reluctant to talk about even the weirder things they saw with Bigfoot. And there's something going on out there, and none of us have the answers. I don't think anybody has the answers. I don't think the government has the answers. I think everybody's trying to figure it out. But there's a lot more to this phenomenon than anybody else can imagine. And just in recent weeks and months, again, we're having a number of Bigfoot sightings, UFO reports coming in. We're having some very strange things being reported. I just received several weeks ago, if you go to my website, stangordon.info, there's a still you can see from the video that was sent to me. This was taken in North Huntington, Pennsylvania, which has a lot of reports of phenomena for years and years. But this is a family. It's somebody a video they took in January of this year. There had been a fresh early morning snow. They looked out their window, and they were surprised to see this long trail of about 15-inch long footprints with about a 4 to 5 foot stride between the tracks and the fresh snow, nothing else around. But what really startled them was there was no beginning to the tracks. They just suddenly appeared like in the yard. They went for a distance. They went towards the children's playground area, and they disappeared in the playground area, and no more tracks. Just like it suddenly appeared, whatever it was, it walked for a distance and disappeared. And it startled them. And that's something we've had reports of for years from many areas. It's another one of the phenomena which suggests that there's something more to the phenomena than any of us understand at this point.
And that's one thing I've always appreciated about you, Stan, is you will take weird reports. You will look into them seriously and treat the people with respect and seriously look into what they saw, no matter how weird it is. I mean, let's face it, Bigfoot's weird enough, and then some of this other stuff that goes on. And the stuff that you're talking about with some of these stranger reports, everyone thinks it's kind of a new thing. And it's not. I mean, you were taking these reports before I was even born, some of these stranger reports, and we're still hearing about it today. So it's fascinating stuff. When we come back, I'd like to get your take on what the eye glow is, and also your take on the smell. Probably one of the most fascinating theories I've heard about the smell. When we come back, we'll be talking to Stan Gordon, investigator, author. We'll be back in a moment. And as we took a quick break, I want to thank Stan Gordon again for coming on. We'll get back to him in a moment. Please check out his website, stangordon.info. I also want to thank one of our sponsors, Robinhood. Robinhood is an investing app that lets you build and sell stocks, ETFs, options, and cryptos, all commission-free. You know, I've been trying to, over the last couple of years, I've wanted to get involved in the stock market. I'm a little nervous about it because it seems like a risk and I don't really know what I'm doing. Robinhood will walk you through that. It's kind of a guide to the stock market. It's a great platform. It's a non-intimidating way for stock market newcomers to invest for the first time with true confidence. And the app really is simple, it's intuitive, it's got a clear design, it's easy to use. Robinhood is giving listeners a free stock like Apple, Ford, or Sprint to help build your portfolio. Sign up at sasquatch.robinhood.com. That's sasquatch.robinhood.com. You can discover new stocks, track your favorite companies with personalized news feeds, and you can get customized notifications for price movements, so you're never out of the loop. You're constantly there if you need to use it. It's a great product. Definitely check them out. Robinhood, sasquatch.robinhood.com. Thank you again to Robinhood for sponsoring the show. Let's get back to Mr. Stan Gordon. And before we went on break, Stan, we were talking about the eye glow. And what is your take on the eye glow? And when I say eye glow, I don't mean eye shine. I mean like the eyes lighting up like Christmas lights. And I've had many of those reports. What is your take on that?
Yeah, you know, again, I've interviewed hundreds of Bigfoot witnesses. And I'll tell you about an amazing incident that just happened this past weekend. And I'll tell you about that shortly. But yeah, I've talked to many people. I've talked to many hunters. Some of these guys have been out there with 20, 30 years, never saw a thing until that one day. And then they had the encounter with a Bigfoot. And their lives were dramatically changed. And these guys were familiar with all the wildlife in the area. They were familiar with eye shine. They knew what it looked like, being familiar with deer and rabbit and other wildlife animals and the normal night shine you would get. But they said this was completely different, much more brilliant. I mean, it was so bright, almost like artificial lighting. I mean, I've interviewed people who've seen these creatures in daylight at close range, and some of them talked about the luminous glow of the eyes, that they said it was almost like artificial lighting. It was so bizarre, so bright. And, in some cases you don't have that. And in other cases you do have this very brilliant luminosity, and the colors are generally orange red, bright green, sometimes yellow. But it's amazing. And we just had this incident. This was last weekend. This is in the greater Pittsburgh area down in the Mon Valley, which has had a history for years and years of Bigfoot sightings. And it was over the weekend. It was a rainy night, and this fellow's riding down this very dark, lonely road. And he catches something in his low beams to the left side of the road ahead of him, and he goes a little slower, not sure what this is. And he puts his high beams on, and as he's moving closer, this creature walks out right in the middle of the road, 5 feet from his car, stands in the road, and he said, this thing looked eye to eye right at me. And he said, I have never been so frightened in my life. I talked to him within 15 minutes after he had the experience, and he said, I'm just shaking on the phone talking to you right now. This guy didn't really believe in these stories and these reports. And he said it was just incredible. He said these eyes were beet red, but they were very luminous. He said they were luminous like flashlight beams. That's how bright they were. And there's no lighting on this road at all. And, I'll be putting the report out on my website hopefully very soon. We're waiting for an artist to go down and do a sketch with him. And I was at the scene the next day. We searched the area where everything happened. Unfortunately, it was a pouring rain during the night. It was covered with leaves. Couldn't find any tracks. We found some interesting things overworld standing by the side of the road, but we can't say it was connected directly to the incident, possibly. But it's one of the most detailed Bigfoot reports I've heard from years ago, in years. And he gave us an extremely detailed account of the physical description of this creature because it was so close to him. And so it's a very interesting story. But some of these other reports we're getting, even in recent weeks, again, up along the Chestnut Ridge, up in the Dairy side, on the Westmoreland County side, which is very, very active historically with reports. We had an incident, I'm trying to think, this has been, in mid-September. And this fellow's riding down the road. It was a rainy night. And he said suddenly in front of him in his headlights, this thing seems to peer out of nowhere. He said, I looked at this thing. It's around 7 feet tall. It has a definite human-like form, but it's all misty looking. There's no other fog on, kind of mist around it. And he said it had a very large, massive chest, and it was kind of stooped over like it had bad posture. And he said the weirdest thing was I couldn't see his legs real well, but it looked like it was gliding or floating above the road into the field, and it disappeared. And we get other reports like that as well. And then in October, early October, only a few miles away, up on top of the ridge, so it's not far from where that other sighting took place with another person, a beautiful morning, and this woman is taking a walk up near the tree line, and she hears this noise like something loud hitting against a tree, and she's walking in, and 20 feet away, there's this big tree in front of her, and she said, I kept looking at this thing, then I realized here's this creature that looks like it's almost like it's trying to camouflage itself, that it's actually hugging the tree. It's about 7 foot tall with shaggy dark hair, and the arms are so long it's completely wrapped around the tree trunk. It had his cheeks of his face against the tree looking directly at her. And she said the eyes were much larger than a human, but they were dark black. And she said she was petrified. She ran to another tree about 10 feet away and hid behind it, got her composure back because she had a camera phone with her. She was going to run back and try to get a picture, which she did. She runs back, it's gone. Which she said, I don't understand. I'm 10 feet away. This thing was really big, and I never heard it leave. So, again, those are just some of the recent reports we're getting.
You know, some of the weirder stuff, the more paranormal stuff, and you might agree or disagree with me, seems to happen more with dogmen. It does happen with Sasquatch. I definitely do get those reports. But one thing I've noticed just through my collecting of reports is generally you'll get a lot of the weird stuff when people have these on their property. When a hunter comes across one or a hiker comes across one, they seem to be more like an unknown primate out there running around like a wild animal. However, the more people are around these things, they start to notice very odd things, like balls of light or their eyes lighting up. And just what you just mentioned, I've taken many reports like that from people who've had these on their property. Generally, they have a hard. It's like pulling teeth for them to talk about. You know what you're talking about with it being translucent or kind of vanishing like the predator. But I have had a lot of those reports. Have you noticed that? Do you notice it on people's property, or is it one-time encounters you're seeing this weird stuff, more weird than Bigfoot is?
Some of these are sporadic, one-of-a-time experiences, and sometimes, like during the 73 wave, there were incidents where these were going on for months around certain geographical areas, and sometimes they would return for a period of time, like on some farms, which we tried to stake out. So that happens occasionally. You get into these incidents, like the famous Skinwalker Ranch, for example. Okay, well, there's been other cases like that around the country and here in Pennsylvania for years. I mean, I can think of at least one in Pennsylvania right now that was active as recently as the last week, that it started a few years ago when everything was just completely normal, and then all of a sudden they began to hear screams and howls. They began to have poltergeist activity. They began to see UFOs. They began to have Bigfoot encounters. They were finding footprints, weird balls of light, all kind of weird things was going on. And now it's going on and off. And it's been going on now for probably 3 years that I can think of. And other people who have been to the property have experienced things as well. There are other locations like this as well that it goes on. There was one area I worked on back in the 80s where an incident happened in Westmoreland County where one afternoon people saw an object fall from the sky into the woods, and soon after they began to hear screams and cries and seeing strange cryptids and hearing Bigfoot, Black Panthers, all kind of phenomena, and it went on for several years. And sometimes these things are only a one-time shot, and sometimes they stick around for a while. And it seems as though sometimes the phenomena seems to focus on a particular area or a property for whatever reason. And like I said years ago, the phenomenon is so strange it protects itself. It's so bizarre unless you're a part of it, it's very hard to believe these things are going on. And, I don't think I mentioned this to you, but in all the years I've been doing this year is 59 years of research, I have never seen a UFO or Bigfoot myself. I've seen a lot of evidence.
Yeah, it's strange. You were talking about the flash of light. And have you heard of the Stardust Ranch?
Which one?
The Stardust Ranch. The guy that was out there and he was killing them with the samurai sword, killing aliens.
I've heard something about it. I'm not real familiar with it.
Well, what's bizarre is he mentions them disappearing in a ball of light. He does claim, or in a flash of light, he does claim to have evidence of body parts and blood from these things. The part that is hard for me to wrap my head around when it comes to Sasquatch is most of the time it seems like a physical being, whatever Sasquatch is. It seems to be very physical, seems to want to eat, seems to want to, it leaves tracks, sometimes it leaves hair. I've had reports on the show of people shooting them and hurting these things. And then you get the other side of it to where they just seem to vanish. And I don't want to use the term superpowers, but they seem to have some weird paranormal, I guess superpower is the best word. And it's so bizarre because there's two sides to the coin. Sometimes you'll get where they're very physical, and then sometimes you'll get some of the weird stuff. The mind speak, the glowing red eyes, the glowing orange eyes, or just glowing eyes in general, and these things seem to vanish. What's your take on that? That they seem to be physical and they seem not to be?
There's a physical and a non-physical component to all the phenomena, and it's not just Bigfoot I deal with. I deal with all kind of cryptid reports. I deal with thunderbird sightings, these massive giant birds with these massive wings that are seen. Some are described as like giant bats that are leathery. Some are more like something prehistoric. And again, very credible people who are really reluctant to tell their story. But I know, for example, a researcher told me several months ago up on the ridge where they've been seeing these giant birds too, that one witness told him not only was it huge and close by and flapping its wings but couldn't hear any flap, but it was transparent. They could see right through it. I've had other types of cryptids and black panthers, for example. I mean, I've got a whole bunch of reports of these Black Panther creatures in Pennsylvania, which, of course, when people think of Black Panthers, they typically think of a black leopard, a black jaguar, not common in this part of the world, but they've been seeing them for years and years in Pennsylvania and other areas, and, of course, nobody's ever come up with a body, but one of the aspects of it that I noticed years ago, and I know it's not just here in Pennsylvania, if sometimes when you have a localized outbreak of Bigfoot sightings, you'll get an outbreak of other cryptids in the area as well, quite common with Black Panthers. And there have been incidents around the country and in Pennsylvania where more than one cryptid is seen together with another cryptid. So, for example, you may have a Bigfoot next to a Black Panther at the same time. It's such a complicated phenomenon. It's so beyond our understanding. And, I don't think anybody has the answers at this point. But, the whole point is with Bigfoot, whatever these creatures are, something similar has been seen throughout the country and around the world for years and years, and still no bodies. That doesn't make any sense that this is some type of an unknown primate. After so many years, it just doesn't make any sense. And I think there's a lot more we have to learn about the phenomena until we have the answers.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Stan. I mean, they are seen all over the world. I mean, really, every country has a name for them. Australia, they call them the Yowie. We call it Sasquatch, Bigfoot. Russia, they call it the Alma. China, I believe it's the urine. I mean, all these countries are basically seeing, everyone in these countries is basically seeing the same thing, yet it hasn't come out. No government's come forward and said, hey, yeah, these things are real. It's very bizarre. It's very bizarre.
And I've had reports of people allegedly who have hit them with their vehicles, and they said they disappeared on impact. And then there's so many different aspects to it. And you're talking about the balls of light. Well, I started talking about these back probably 45 years ago, that when we would have an outbreak in a certain area where the Bigfoot will start showing up, the strange lights are showing up, and I'm have an interest in what I call the mini UFOs. They're not your large elliptical objects or discs or triangular objects, and the more recent years are getting a lot of rectangular reports. These are these very small objects that range anywhere from a few inches to about a foot in diameter. Generally spherical, not always. Sometimes a solid metallic, sometimes it's just a bright light source of various colors, sometimes you can see through them. They're very intriguing because they'll come very close to people. They don't bother anybody. They'll enter people's homes and cars through open windows, and they'll fly around and go back out. We've had reports of them going right through the walls of homes and going right through the beds of vehicles. And but in more recent years, throughout the country and here in Pennsylvania, Bigfoot researchers who are investigating Bigfoot cases and are scouting areas where there's a lot of history of Bigfoot, they're not seeing Bigfoot, but they're seeing these strange orbs of light coming very close to them.
Yeah, I actually filmed one. I know people used to talk about it, and I was like, well, I've never seen one. And I actually filmed one on night vision, and it was bizarre. It was very bizarre. It was relatively close to us, and it was very bizarre looking. Made no noise. Strangest color I've ever seen. Strangest way it had an ambient light about it. It wasn't like a bright light. It's just a real bizarre light. Do you think it's all connected? Do you think the alien phenomenon, the lights, Sasquatch, Dogman, and some of the other weird cryptids that you've looked into, do you think it's all connected?
I hate to use that term alien, but, when we talk about alien, that doesn't necessarily mean extraterrestrial. I keep trying to stress on their shows that I do that I'm not suggesting that Bigfoot is a passenger riding around in a spaceship from another planet, because we don't know that. We don't even know for sure what the UFOs represent. I mean, there's a lot of speculation. I've said for years there's more than one origin to the unknown category of UFO reports. Many, many years ago when I started in this, everything was extraterrestrial. Everybody thought these were spaceships from another world. Well, the more and more data we have, the less likely it is that so many of these are that. Maybe a small percentage could be. But once again, what I'm seeing more and more, I think, is so beyond our present scientific understanding. We're starting to get into areas of science that might explain it, but I think we're dealing, again, with a lack of a better term, it's something interdimensional, that these creatures, under certain conditions that come into our physical reality, they can look physically solid at times, but they don't always. They can leave physical evidence, and then they're gone. They come and they go.
Yeah, and you have an interesting take on the smell with Sasquatch, and I was hoping you'd tell your theory on it. And I found it fascinating when I heard you say this, because there's really no rhyme or reason behind the smell. Sometimes Bigfoot researchers will say, well, apes give off this BO smell. Most people I've talked to said it's like a sulfur. Sometimes you hear it in ghost and paranormal. You hear people smelling sulfur. But it's this real odd smell. And then they see the creature shortly after smelling the smell. Would you mind sharing your theory on the smell?
Yeah, well, the odor, as you said, many times there is a very strong pungent odor. A lot of people describe like something's been dead for a long time, like sulfur, rotten eggs. But in many instances, there's no odor at all. The incident I told you about last weekend where the creature was 5 feet away from the witness, there was no smell whatsoever. I did get to smell it. I didn't see the creature, but I did get to smell it. And this was during the 73 wave out in Derry Township, where there were so many sightings along the ridge, and a police officer called me to come down to interview 2 women. He said these 2 women were very, very shook up. They were very credible. They only came to his office because they heard a rumor that the local police had shot and killed the creature, and they wanted to see it because they wanted to see if that was the same thing they had encountered. And I remember the case very, very well. This was a very warm August night, and this woman sleeping in her room, and she began to wake up. She felt uncomfortable, like somebody was looking at her. She turned over and looked, and only a few feet away, here's this creature bent down. The window had been open. It pulled back the drapes, and it was so tall. I mean, the window is 9 feet off the ground. It was bent down, looking directly at her. She was able to draw a great sketch of this creature with its cheeks and its eyes and everything, and it backed. I mean, she was just very shook up. It backed up and went around the other side of the house where her daughter was sleeping. She soon started screaming about seeing the biggest shadow she had ever seen by her window, and then all of a sudden this terrible smell began to encompass the area and filled the house. And they heard, because it was in the news around the area, people have been seeing this thing, that's when they heard a rumor the police had shot the creature, so they called the police, and the officer called me down to interview them because that wasn't the case. But he felt they were very, very credible. When I got there 3 days later, that smell, you could still smell it in the house like something had been dead for a long time. And my feeling is And it's just the theory that the smell has something to do with that process of this phenomena, whatever it is, when these things come into our physical reality. It's a part of that process. Again, like I said, I don't think anybody knows what's going on. We know a lot about it. We see patterns to it. You know, if there was only one or two people telling you these stories, but I've been doing this for a long time, and I've interviewed, like I said, hundreds of people from widespread areas who don't know each other. 99% of the people I interview are anonymous because they don't want any publicity. They have nothing to gain. Who calls me? People from all walks of life, men, women, children, hunters, police officers, I mean, all kind of credible people. And I always say the best witnesses are people who wouldn't believe these things would exist until they had their own personal encounter. Just like the fellow I interviewed over the weekend who didn't believe in this stuff, used to kind of laugh at a relative of his that did believe in it. And like he said, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'd never so frightened in my life.
Yeah, do you sometimes see correlations between two separate phenomena? For example, the smell. And then sometimes I know you've looked into ghosts and other things. Has that ever come up before? Has someone ever talked to you about that smell? And then you think, and then you think back and go, it sounds like the same thing. Yeah, I mean the sulfur odor, the rotten odor of rotten eggs and sulfur smell, it's common throughout the paranormal. I mean, if you talk to anybody that's been dealing with the ghosts and hauntings, they talk about the smell. The smell is common in UFO history. I mean, a lot of people dealt with UFO cases. On some occasions, historically, you get that sulfur or rotten smell. So, again, it's something that's shown up. I mean, again, the more I look into this phenomena, and it wasn't until a few years ago that I began to see more and more from so many researchers I've talked to and witnesses I've talked to, I do think that a lot of the phenomena, there is some association between all the phenomena. There's some common link to all these things that are going on, but once again, it's so beyond our comprehension right now, but there's something happening. Everybody can't be wrong. Yeah, and it seems like it's happening more. Do you notice that there's more reports coming out now, Stan, as opposed to when you got into this? Well, I don't think I've never seen anything like the 73 outbreak. And again, I get reports all year round, every year. This year has been a little more active than normal. And the kind of reports we're getting is what's interesting. I mean, in the last few years, for example, I'm seeing more and more what I would call the classic UFO reports, for example. Kind we used to get in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s of not lights in the sky, but large structured craft. Sometimes metallic, battleship gray, huge craft, very close to the ground, sometimes on the ground. We have instances where there have been landing cases. We had physical traces. We had labs examine materials. We're seeing more and more of those kind of reports coming in. But the quality of some of these Bigfoot sightings the last few years, where, I mean, these reports are very close range, very detailed reports. And, I mean, there's something happening out there. I definitely agree. It's during that 73, 74, when there was a lot of just weird things going on, and this could be anything. Is there a couple encounters that really stick out to you? Some of that was just bizarre. Oh my gosh! Well, there are so many reports. Like I said, I've been involved with hundreds of Bigfoot sightings. I told you about a couple of the Bigfoot UFO cases, and there were so many different ones. I mean, I remember another incident, and I'm just from top of my head. November of 73 up in Fayette County again. Fellow was running his hunting dogs that evening. He had a lot of private property up there. He sees a figure in the dark way ahead of him and yells at a person. He thought it was a person, didn't realize it's a tall, hair-covered ape-like creature. He grabs his pistol, starts shooting this thing, and he says he's shooting at this thing. He's been a hunter for years. He knew he hit it. He said when he shot it, the thing physically disappeared in front of him. He could still hear it running away, but he couldn't see it. And, I mean, that's just the example of some of the reports that we're getting. And, you had brought up about footprints before. And this is another thing I deal with in my one lecture, that it's hard enough for us to understand or believe there could be one type of unknown five-toed primate running around, because we've all seen those typical five-toed tracks from throughout the country and around the world, and they're interesting. And, yeah, there are hoaxes on occasion. We don't get that many, but there's ways to tell. And then we get a lot of your consistent five-toed footprints, but also in Pennsylvania, throughout many parts of the country and around the world, and in many areas where
it's well known with Pacific Northwest and other areas of the country where you have a lot of history of Bigfoot. Not only do you have the 5-toe tracks, you got the 3-toe tracks, and even sometimes 4-toe tracks. And I've made castings of both over the years. But there's also a menagerie of other footprints that are very, very intriguing and very strange. They're completely different. And yet similar tracks have shown up throughout the country and other parts of the world. I mean, I have tracks here that look similar to tracks we found in China. Some of the Yowie tracks over there look like what we've got over here. And some of the tracks are just very, very unusual. No evidence of a hoax. The people were very credible, reported the incidents. How can you have so many unknown primates running around? It makes no sense. We've got to be dealing with something that's a part of the same stimulus. We just don't understand what we're dealing with. But I can tell you, from what I've seen, there's a energy connection to the phenomena. Something I noticed years ago, many close-range UFO sightings and many encounters with cryptids, so encounters with Bigfoot, the giant thunderbirds, the Black Panthers, all kinds of these weird entity reports we get, they commonly occur in the vicinity of high-energy sources. So you've got sightings around like gas wells and gas lines and power plants and high-tension power lines and railroad tracks and water reservoirs and radio communication towers, and it goes on and on and on. And I would bet you if investigators look at how many sightings they've had, they look what's close by in the area, they'll find very commonly energy sources close by.
Yeah, and there's a lot of strange reports. I've talked to hunters, or not hunters, Bigfoot researchers. This is off the air because they'll never say it publicly. But several I've talked to said there's something going on. You know, sometimes their cameras don't work. Sometimes game cams fail. They'll set out food and have these game cams surrounded where the food's at, and the food will be gone, and then there's nothing on the game cams, almost like they failed for a minute or two. And I don't really know what to make of that.
That's another thing. Again, all these things of what I've run into, but I talk about, this is all part of my lecture. I talk about the electromagnetic effects that occur not only with UFOs, but also with Bigfoot. You know, back in, I'd say 50s, 60s, there were a lot of UFO incidents where these large objects would come down and pace cars and hover over areas, and there would be localized power failures, or the vehicle would lose power when this object would be close by, and when the object ascended, the power came back on. Well, it's not that well known, but we also have similar incidents with Bigfoot cases. So we've had incidents where a Bigfoot will run out in front of a car, and a motor would start sputtering, and when the creature ran off, everything came back to normal. I had one case I remember, in fact, I wrote about it in my Astonishing Encounters book, where people were riding down the road the one evening, they had their headlights on, and they said all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I mean, it was a straight shot, they should have seen it before they approached, this 7-8 foot tall hairy Bigfoot just suddenly appears right on the edge of the road. It had huge appendages, very long arms and legs. They had to swerve around to miss hitting it. And at that point, when they were right next to it, all of a sudden the car was almost slowed to nothing. And the passengers are yelling, "Get out of here, get out of here, hit the gas." And the drivers, the more this person hits the gas, the slower the car was going. So as it's slowly moving away from the creature, as it got further away, all the power came back on. It's just a very, very bizarre phenomenon we're dealing with.
It is bizarre, and I've noticed, like with Dogman reports in particular, I'll get a lot of weird, you know, like you talked about the mist. I've heard that many times in several Dogman reports. And the one thing I've noticed about the Dogman, when people, like, for instance, I've had several of these on the show where they shoot at them and they're on the property and they don't kill them, but the guy that took the shot, all of a sudden now that entity, and I don't know what else to call it besides an entity, that entity has interest now in that person and is going to torment that person. It'll come around to that person's window and just kind of screw with that one person that took a shot. And I've heard many encounters like that, especially with Dogman, to where it feels more paranormal. It feels more like how a poltergeist would pick on you or torment you. The Dogman seems to do the same thing. It seems to really enjoy terrorizing you.
Okay, yep, I ran into this 40 years ago, and it's not that common, but it's happened on occasion. And I always recommend to people, one, don't shoot at these things because you're not going to bring them down anyhow. But in incidents I had where people did shoot at them, sometimes it seemed as though more of the phenomenon was focusing on that person or that family for a period of time. I can tell you also what I brought up is the fact that I found some incidents where, for example, well, I'll give you one. I remember one case back in '73 when a woman and a child were down at a cemetery at a grave site that late that afternoon, and they were putting some flowers on the grave, and the babies were walking around, and they would been going out there for at least a week putting flowers on the grave, and the woman began to hear this baby crying sound. I thought it was a baby from a house up on the hill. Didn't pay much attention to it, and then realized that her little baby was beginning to cry about 30 feet away. She looks over, and here's this Bigfoot standing on the edge of the woods, slowly beginning to move towards the child, maybe attracted to the same sound it was making. She grabs the child and jumps in the car and takes off and goes several miles away to her father's farm. Within the hour, the same or similar creatures showed up at that farm. The animals were frightened and upset. One of the persons took a shot at it. They called the state police. I've had incidents where, in some cases, it seems as though these creatures seem to follow people over a distance.
And what do you make of that? Because that doesn't sound, I mean, you and I agree. I mean, that doesn't sound like a normal wildlife. A cougar's not going to follow you over a long distance. A bear's not going to follow you over a long distance. Do you feel like sometimes, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but I know you've looked into a lot of ghost encounters, for example. Do you sometimes feel like it's all one and the same? We're all kind of like, you almost see a pattern between, like in poltergeist encounters, where they want to torment people, they want to terrorize people, they will follow you home. People go off to these ghost hunts or whatever, come home, and all of a sudden they brought someone home with them or something home with them. And sometimes I see correlations between the two. Maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Well, I'm not deeply involved in the paranormal aspects with ghosts and hauntings. I was very interested in it. I did investigate some of these cases, especially back in the 60s when I was getting started. I'm pretty familiar with it. I know a lot of people were deeply involved in it long before, all this more recent interest with the paranormal is going on. And, once again, there's a lot of similarities between what the ghost hunters deal with and what the people in these other fields are dealing with. I remember cases where, again, the electromagnetic effect that a lot of ghost hunters will tell you, and I know one case I was involved in indirectly, but I watched the case. I was at an event many years ago that I didn't know I was going to be going to. I was speaking on these subjects on Bigfoot and UFOs, and that evening some of the people decided they were going on this into this haunted mansion that wasn't open to the public, and I wasn't prepared to go, but I went, and there was at least 6 people there with camcorders, and some of them had temperature sensors, and we were watching these little orbs floating around, and I was watching through the monitor, so it wasn't dust and dirt, and the monitors were indicating there was a change in very cold temperatures in those particular areas, and they were videotaping them. And I remember within minutes, I believe all 6 camcorders completely died and lost all their power. So all the batteries were discharged. And that was extremely interesting. And that's something we're seeing more and more. I knew about this long ago, but in recent years, for example, I've had incidents where people have attempted to take pictures with both cryptids and UFOs, either with a cell phone cameras that were fully charged or regular digital cameras, and when they went to take a picture, either the camera would malfunction or it was completely discharged its power. And that's something that's been showing up more and more, this electromagnetic effect with some of these cases. And yes, we do get game camera pictures in on occasion, but I've heard from many people the same thing, that sometimes there's a camera malfunction or the camera doesn't work properly when these things are around, but they're still able to get the food. So once again, that's another aspect that's very intriguing.
It is very intriguing. I wanted to ask you, what's the strangest cryptid you've ever looked into?
Oh, my gosh. I've worked on so many cases. Last year, and I wish I had a report in front of me, if people go to my website, stangordon.info, all these reports, well, not all, but a lot of these reports, and some of the ones we're talking about tonight are on my website. And this particular one was a very intriguing one because it involved a police officer on patrol last year. And I won't say exactly where it happened, but he was on patrol, and he came across something that has baffled him since the night it happened. And he's riding down this road that he patrolled commonly. He sees this ball of light on the ground. He's realizing, well, gee, there's no artificial lighting around here. As he gets closer and he stops his vehicle, he says, suddenly this ball of light that's on the ground stands up. And he realizes this is not a decoration. This ball of light is the head of a creature that's about 6 feet tall. It's tall and almost skeletal thin. And he said apparently the thing had been lying on its belly on the ground with its head facing towards the road. It stood up facing the road, and he said the dull light from the glowing head illuminated the upper section of the body. And he said he's watching this thing, and the creature turns to the right, and it's lighting up the shoulders and that, again, the higher part of the body. And he said this thing turned, and he said with incredible speed, it ran off and was gone. And he could see it swinging its long arms. And he said it moved faster than anything he's ever seen in his life. He said it was there and then it was gone. He said he assumed that it was on two legs, but he couldn't see the lower section of the body well. But he said the head was about 8 to 10 inches in diameter, shaped like a ball of light, possibly kind of egg-shaped. The light emitted from it was dull white, but illuminated like the shoulders and the top of the chest and part of the arms. He could not see the hands. He said the chest looked to be about 18 inches across, but he said the waist appeared to be small, but the arms were abnormally long. The long limbs looked skeletal with no muscle mass. The skin tone appeared to be kind of a dull grayish blue. He couldn't see the facial features. And as the creature ran off, he pulled his patrol car up, shined his spotlight, looked around, couldn't see any evidence. Interestingly, over the next few months, I believe we had 4 or 5 other somewhat similar reports, except for the glowing head, but similar of something tall and skeletal thin that's been seen around this area and around the Pittsburgh area. So that's one that sticks out. And I can think of many other ones as well.
Yeah, I got pictures I need to send you. There's a lady who had Sasquatch on her property, and she sent me these pictures, and what you described is basically what she got pictures of. They look like tall, kind of big, round, egg-shaped heads. There's really no detail to it, but it looks like a person standing. And she got one on her roof. It looks like it's looking down into a window, and then she also got one on her back porch. But there's really no detail. It looks like I don't know how to describe it, like a weird humanoid shape. And it's just a real ambient line around this thing. And I didn't have any answers for her. I was like, I've never seen such a thing. So I'll have to send them to you, Stan. Take a look at them. Tell me what you think.
Sure, that's fine. Yeah, it's been just a mysterious world out there. And again, there's so many different type of cryptid reports we're getting. One of the famous ones was what they call the Butler gargoyle. And that was several years ago, north of Pittsburgh, up in Butler County, which, heck, I've been up there since the 60s, investigating all kind of weird phenomena. There's a lot of history of all kind of things up there. But this creature, this was a professional businessman. I got to interview him many times. I got to know him very well personally. He's riding down this road. This is between East Brady and I can't think of the other little town up there, but it's up there in Butler County, and he's riding down the road, and his headlight catches something off to the field to the right, thought it was a deer, but as he gets closer, this thing rises from the ground, and it's about at least 8 feet tall. He's looking at it from the side. I never looked at him, and he said, when I talked to him, he said, I've heard people talking about Bigfoot. He said, this thing was not a Bigfoot. He said, this thing had light leathery skin throughout the body. Its head was kind of swept back like an aerodynamic helmet. The eyes were swept back. Its arms had claws for hands. The legs were very muscular and I believe short, and they kind of moved backwards. And he said it had wings tipped into its back. And it took 3 big steps across the road and went off into the woods. And he got a very good look at this thing. It walked right in front of a big sign. The sign was over 8 foot tall, and this thing was a little taller. Within days, a number of other people reported to the local Butler BORU group up there, the research group, seeing the same thing. And apparently there have been 1 or 2 sightings of this thing in the last year up in that area again. Some of the cryptid reports I've been getting the last few years are even stranger than what we've talked about.
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of strange ones. Have you ever heard of the rake? Have you ever taken any reports of the rake?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of odd ones. I know we're coming up against our time here. I wanted to ask you one last question. When I look at this, I notice that some of the tactics they use to shut people up who've seen UFOs mainly UFOs, they seem to use the same tactics when it comes to Bigfoot. Let's say if someone has real evidence, they seem to use the same tactics they do with UFOs. Do you think there's a cover-up, and why do you think there's a cover-up, if you do?
Well, yeah, if you talk about like the alleged men in black and the mysterious men that shut up witnesses and whatever, I've worked on thousands and thousands of cases over the years, and those kind of stories are very, very rare. Very rarely do you ever hear this kind of reports, and they were more common for whatever reason. Like during that 73 outbreak, we did have mystery men appear. We had one fellow showed up at a site where they apparently found hair samples, and a person tried to get a hold of me, and there was an emergency call to me from the operator, and whoever this guy was, we'd never be able to find out, but he took the hair sample saying that he was a friend of mine. He destroyed footprints at the scene. A young boy was taking pictures of footprints. He had one of those little Polaroid cameras at the time that you could put the cartridge in and get a picture out instantly, and he ripped it out of his hands and destroyed it. And whoever that guy was, we don't know. I've had other incidents of very amazing documented evidence which indicates the possibility that there could have been some government agencies involved in an investigation. Can't prove it. I don't know. But my feeling has been for a long time the government has an interest in both UFOs and Bigfoot. And I think that they're realizing there's something going on there with both phenomena, and they're trying to figure out what it is.
Yeah, and the one you had mentioned, that happened at a trailer park, didn't it? Wasn't there a lady that reported it? I remember seeing this. I think it was on Unsolved Mysteries. And the Bigfoot was doing something with the electrical box or something, and that guy showed up. I didn't realize that was you.
Yeah, that was out at this one. This was again out in Derry Township, along the base of the Chestnut Ridge. There were a lot of reports going on. These people were in a mobile home that evening when they began to hear something. I scratched on the end of the trailer. You hear like this baby whining, crying sounds from outside, and the power was going on off in the trailer. Well, my team was at another Bigfoot site when we got a call from 911 to report up to that area. The police wanted us up in Derry Township, so we hurried and got up there. And when we got to the scene, the police had already been there. They found some footprints there, and they were preserving them for us. And when we searched the area, we found that the main electrical box, meter box, had been ripped open, and that heavy-duty supply line that runs from there to the trailer had been ripped up out of the ground. And they also had some big blocks have been moved where they had been found before, and like somebody had knocked the bricks over out there as well. And again, there's your energy connection for whatever reason. And I truly believe there's an energy connection to all these phenomena we're dealing with.
Yeah, there could be. There definitely could be. I'll have to have you back, Stan. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And for the audience, definitely check out stangordon.info. Pick up his book, Silent Invasion, the Pennsylvania UFO-Bigfoot Casebook. You can get on stangordon.info. You can also get on Amazon. And also check out his other book, Astonishing Encounters. Stan, thank you again for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun this evening.
And that's it for tonight, everyone. Remember, if you've had an encounter, shoot me an email. My email address is wes@sasquatchchronicles.com. And if you get a chance, please check out sasquatchchronicles.com. You can become a member, get additional shows. Until next time, everyone.
Memories of you. smile.